Hello and welcome to the American Council on Exercise live webinars continuing education series. My name is Jackie Crockford and I'm excited to be your host for our live event today. Before we get started with our live webinar, let's go ahead and review a few logistics so that you can have a great learning experience. You are watching today for free via YouTube, so thanks so much for taking the time to join us. Make sure you take a look at your YouTube chat bar right now. You can use that chat bar anytime you like throughout today's presentation. You can type your questions in for our presenter there, or you can type questions in for ACE, as I'll be monitoring that throughout today's live event. Also remember, because you are watching today for free, no continuing education credits are awarded, but if you would like to earn CECs for today's event, you can do that by using the link provided on your screen. That's acefitness.org/past webinars. And as a special note for this presentation, today we're presenting part 1 live, and if you choose to purchase part 1, you'll receive part 2 as a part of that recorded course. We'll learn more about that at the end of today's presentation. All right, if you're ready for today's live event, let's get started. Welcome to your course, Training Female Clients Through Different Life Stages. My name is Jackie Crockford and I will be your host for today's presentation. Joining me today is our presenter, Jiji Pollock. Jiji, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
We're so excited that you could be here because this is an important topic that we are excited to talk about here during Women's Health Month. So share with us a little bit about your experience in the industry and kind of how you got to where you are in studying. I know you're working on your PhD now, studying women and training women through their life stages.
So first of all, I've been physically active my whole entire life, and I've noticed certain things during certain times of my menstrual cycle. And then I got into fitness and I started training women of different ages and different stages in life, and also different physical abilities. And with that, I noticed some anecdotal evidence. As women, we're very expressive about how we feel about how our bodies are feeling. Oh gosh, I feel this way. Oh, I feel great. And with that being said, well, something is going on here. And then I went to graduate school. And when I went to graduate school, I started reading more about the menstrual cycle. And back then, there wasn't a lot of research about this. There was some. And as time progressed, I stayed in the industry. I've noticed a lot more differences and variances in women's training and different ages and cycles. So that spurred on more study into my PhD and training considerations for women and periodization schemes around the menstrual cycle, including other studies I have going on with older women.
Mm-hmm. So wonderful. So today we're going to be talking about part 1, which are some of those earlier stages in a woman's life cycle, and part 2 is around some of the latter stages. So I'm excited to get this conversation started with you. I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you. Thank you for joining me today. I'm really excited about this topic because women go through menstruation, and it's a biological thing that happens with women. It's a natural cycle of hormones that happen. So it's going to make an impact in a woman's life, learning about what happens to hormones and the stages in their life. And it's going to make an impact not just in the short term, but if you look at this, it also makes an impact in the long term. So I hope you'll join me in part 2 in finding out what happens in the long term to a woman through the hormonal variances in her life. Now, I talk about women. There are a lot of male coaches there, and if you're a male coach or trainer listening, think about how it impacts the women in your life. It's going to make a difference in the women in your life because women are sisters, wives, aunts, best friends, cousins. So it's going to impact the whole family. So it's important for the health and well-being of everybody to kind of lean in and ask questions. And I hope that you will ask questions, and I hope this will bring out a lot of discussion about how training for women may be different during certain times. All right, ready to get started? So I'm going to get my clicker here. We're going to go over the learning objectives. So in this first part, we're going to talk about the life cycle of a woman's hormones. We're going to learn what happens and get an overview about what happens during the hormones in a woman's cycle. And then we're going to look at the menstrual cycle, and we're going to look at the hormonal variances that happen, how it impacts a woman's health, and also, fitness. So we're going to look at both considerations here. Now, women and men, they can train the same, but there are certain times that women need to train differently. So we'll consider when it's important to train women differently. Lastly, we're going to learn about how to communicate a sensitive topic. The menstrual cycle is not easy to talk about, especially if you're a male trainer. And female to female, it may be a little easier, but there's some considerations to take and make when you're trying to talk about the menstrual cycle and the other hormonal impacts that happen. So that'll happen in part 2 of this series. All right, let's get started. We're going to overview the female life stages. First of all, we want to talk about the differences between men and men. There are biological differences between men and men. Anatomically, you can see the differences. Physiologically, they may not be seen, but the physiological differences really dictate the anatomical differences that happen between men and women. Men, by far, have 20 times more testosterone than women. Men manufacture it also at a faster rate. So if we all know testosterone, it makes you bigger, stronger, faster, whether it's made by the body or taken, in other forms. Women also have testosterone. As I said, men have 20 times more. It's still important for women. But because men have such large quantities, there is no way a woman can keep up with, the male muscle physiology. That's why men and women's sports are usually separated. Now, hormonal changes for a woman happen throughout a lifespan. If you look at the graph, puberty on this chart starts about the age of 13. That's about the average age. Now, as soon as a young girl gets her first menstrual cycle, it can go all the way up until the age of 50. Pregnancy happens anywhere from the age of 13. As soon as a girl gets her menstrual cycle, she's able to get pregnant. And now in this day and age, it can happen all the way to age 50, which is awesome. Menopause, perimenopause, happens in the Middle Ages, about the ages of 40, 45, till about the age of 60. Post-menopause will happen about after the age of 60. Now we're going to look at the relative hormonal variances. We're going to look at estrogen right now, and I didn't talk about estrogen, but we will talk about what it does. Estrogen is considered the female hormone. These are the variances we're going to talk about that fluctuate throughout a woman's life. So if you look at the graph, there's minimal amounts at birth, and there's a spike around puberty and adolescent years. Now, estrogen undulates throughout the 20s and 30s, and then when we get into perimenopause and menopause, they get a little bit more erratic and rapidly decline in the postmenopause years. Now we're talking about estrogen, and I'm going to talk about endogenous estrogen. This is the estrogen that your body makes by itself. Estrogen is made by the ovaries in a woman. It is signaled by what's called the hypothalamic pituitary axis. Exogenous estrogen is estrogen a woman takes under the consultation of a medical doctor. So it could be the form of creams or pills or injections. So we are going to talk about endogenous estrogen to start as a biological basis of a woman's just natural state. I'm going to bring up the concept of bioindividuality. It means every woman is different from woman to woman. Now, there are a lot of reasons for bioindividuality. Genetics is huge. The other thing are ethnic backgrounds. And there are a lot of environmental factors that can dictate these hormonal variances in a woman's lifespan. So stress is huge on this. Mental, emotional, and physical stress can change the way these patterns change throughout our lifespan. There's also nutrition, nutritional status, right? Diet has a huge impact on the way these variances happen. Lifestyle habits can change the way these hormonal patterns go. There's also socioeconomic factors that can influence a woman's hormonal life cycle. All right, let's talk about those hormones. Remember, we're talking about endogenous hormones, the ones that are primarily produced by the body. We're going to talk about estrogen and progesterone. Those are the primary sex hormones, but it's important to talk about testosterone since a woman manufactures testosterone also. And I'm going to use the word manufacture, but it makes testosterone. Estrogen, let's talk about what it does. Endogenous estrogen is a huge antioxidant. It's really powerful. And what happens here, I'm sorry, I just got a frog in my throat. Excuse me, I got to clear it. And so it's a huge antioxidant. And what it does is helps with collagen formation. Now, collagen is found all over the tissues of your body. Muscle, skin, bone, fascia. That's all over your body. It helps with collagen formation. And you also have collagen in the blood vessels and all what's called the epithelial cells of your smooth muscle, so all your internal organs. It helps with bone formation. It also helps with muscle repair, recovery, muscle activation. And with blood vessels, it helps conduct blood throughout your system efficiently. Now, progesterone balances out the effect of estrogen. Both are needed in the body for a normal reproductive cycle. Progesterone has been shown in studies to break down muscle protein amino acids. But it's really important because it helps keep the uterus intact and ready for pregnancy. Progesterone also helps with a little bit of fat accumulation in a woman's body. And those are necessary steps for normal reproductive function. Testosterone is super important in a woman's body because it helps build lean muscle mass. It helps with muscle protein synthesis, so it's building muscle mass in your body. It also helps with muscle recovery. So testosterone, although women, we can't be afraid of testosterone, it is a good thing for a woman to have in her body. All right, I hope you're leaning in and thinking about questions or comments during this time as we move on to this webinar. Now, the female life stages happen, these hormonal variances happen all the way from puberty, adolescence, into 20s and 30s, pregnancy and postpartum, which we will cover in the second part, perimenopause and menopause, which we will cover in the second part, and post-menopause. All of these hormonal changes affect a woman's fitness. So it's important to take time to think about how programming can be different over the long term, knowing that a woman has her goals and knowing there is an immediate need at a point in time in her life. Now, I like to call this the crystal ball. If you were to superimpose the graph on the right on top of the left, you would see where those hormonal variances change based on a woman's age or stage in life. Like I said, environmental factors can dictate these changes. So stress, nutrition, lifestyle habits can really impact the way these hormonal variances happen. All right, we're going to move on. I talked about testosterone. We can't be afraid of testosterone. Women have it in such small quantities, but it's really important. Sometimes testosterone is just thought of as the male hormone, and then estrogen as a female hormone, and sometimes it's thought of as, they're different. But really in the body, they follow the same pattern. So when estrogen goes up, Testosterone goes up also. When estrogen goes down, testosterone's been found to go down. They're highly linked together, even though they're in different quantities in a woman's body compared to a man's, which is why we're going to talk about it in some form, shape or form. Testosterone also declines along with estrogen as a woman progresses in age. All right. Are those questions coming? I hope so. All right, that's awesome. All right, let's go over puberty. Or maybe talk about puberty, because I don't know if anyone wants to go over puberty again. I know I don't. All right. So puberty and adolescence, those hormonal changes. If you have teenagers, if you're a coach who has teenagers, you're probably going through it right now. Now, puberty, there's a lot of neuroendocrine changes that happens. There are 5 stages of puberty called the Tanner stages. And the 5 stages of Tanner stages are really dictated by the 3 things that happen hormonally in a young girl. I was just talking about last night to Berkeley, and we were talking about, puberty and where she is and her pubertal development in the Tanner stages. So it's a very interesting time, and I went through it with my boys, and I wasn't as aware of it, and I'm not as aware of it with boys. But being a female, it's really important to take note in consideration as it affects training. Now, the first thing that happens is the adrenal glands become activated, and you're going to be shocked. Around the ages 6 to 8, a young girl begins to start producing adrenals. So DHA and DHEA are hormones that are primarily produced by the androgen glands around the ages 6 or 8. Now, excuse me, gosh, you got a frog in my throat. DHA and DHEA are hugely important for brain development. The brain grows at a huge, alarmingly rate at this time. The second thing that happens is the hypothalamic pituitary axis becomes activated. In the boy, it's the testes. In the girl, it's the ovaries. So about the age of 8, on average age, it's young. Some people call it pre-puberty. Estrogen is produced by the ovaries. And what happens? Then breast tissue develops. And within the Tanner ages, they're called breast buds. But breast tissue starts to develop. And then a little bit of fat accumulation happens around the midsection in young girls at this age because of estrogen and all the other hormones becoming produced. The last thing that happens is menarche, or the start of the first menstrual cycle. Now, all these 3 steps have effect on a young girl's fitness in the years of puberty. So we're going to talk about that in the next slide here. Oop, and I pressed that button again instead of the one on the right. So my thumb is, so we're going to talk about puberty in the next stage, and I hope you're coming up with questions as I come up with these changes here. The first step is the DHA, DHEA becomes produced. A second step, the ovaries become activated and estrogen becomes produced. So let's think about that. Menarche begins and the first menstrual cycle begins. So estrogen is being produced, and then this is when the cyclical changes happen in a girl's life. Did I press the right clicker? I just want to make sure press the right one here. All right, so let's talk about the first phase of pre-puberty or puberty. Children are not mini adults. I spoke about DHA and DHEA being humongously huge for brain development. This is where motor abilities are humongous at this stage. I think it's wonderful for parents to model positive behaviors of exercise, and young girls become so excited. They want to model those behaviors, and I think that's wonderful. Intense exercise at this age with lifting heavy weights may not be what your daughter needs at this stage. So DHA, DHEA is huge for brain development. What's more important is motor capabilities and physical literacy. Studies have shown when young girls develop high amounts of physical literacy and physical confidence, later on in life, they're more likely to become physically active. What's more important? Running, skipping, jumping, striking, kicking, throwing, galloping, hopping, and if your kid is a monkey, climbing is awesome. So for that reason, physical literacy is largely important at this time. If your child is interested in going along with your workouts, body weight training is awesome. Tubing is acceptable as well. What's happening this age, estrogen isn't being produced around the age of 6 or 8. So we want to think about what estrogen does in the body. It's a huge antioxidant. Lifting heavy weights at this stage in life may not be the right thing. The recommended physical activity requirements of kids by the World Health Organization, about 60 minutes of moderately intense exercise. So think about taking your kids to the park, right? Playing sports and right dosage. So let's talk about puberty and adolescence, what happens with those 3 stages. That was my little soapbox. So I have to put my little soapbox on that one. All right, puberty and adolescence has a huge effect on fitness. Let's talk about what happens with DHA and everything that's going on with puberty. So first of all, growth spurts happen. As you know, if you have children, you can look at your child one day and then they're, at eye level, and then they can wake up one morning, you're like, whoa, you're taller than me. I have 3 sons, and one morning I woke up and all of a sudden all of them are taller than me. Growth spurts happen in young girls. Now, what happens with the growth spurt, height increases, the uterus gets larger, and so the hips get wider. What also happens is, with the height increases, the leg bone, the femur, grows at a faster rate compared to the lower leg bone, the tibia. Weight increases, which is normal at this age. So you get height increases, the hip gets wider, the thigh bone gets longer, a little bit faster than the lower leg, and a girl begins to develop physically. Bone remodeling is huge at this age. So I remember mentioning I want this to look like a crystal ball. So during puberty, a girl can reach 25% of her peak bone mass at this age. This is where becoming physically active really impacts bone development. Biological age in a young girl is usually determined by bone development. Bone remodeling can become huge if a girl is physically active this age. The rate of osteoporosis is 30% greater in a woman compared to man. There are other reasons, but a young girl can mitigate her chances of getting osteoporosis if she is more physically active in the right dose during the pubertal years prior to getting her first menstrual cycle. Now, muscle activation and development starts to begin at this age. Androgens are being more produced, estrogens being more produced. Studies have shown there's a little bit of a delayed activation in the hamstring muscle compared to the quadricep muscle in young girls. So it's important to take note as we're programming exercises for girls in their puberty and adolescent years. Now I'm going to talk about ACL injuries. I'm trying to link the present to the future. It'd be like Back to the Future. It'd be kind of cool if you could do that, right? So ACL injuries are 7 to 8 times greater in young girls compared to boys. And you wonder, like, why? Why is that happening? Well, if you think about it, there's a height increase, right? The hips get wider. We talk about the anatomical differences between boys and girls. The thigh bone grows at a faster rate compared to the lower leg. And then weight increases. Non-contact injury for ACL injuries are greater in young girls. When a girl is doing cutting maneuvers or jumping and landing maneuvers, the moment of force can be greater in the knee joint. So it's important to keep in mind that there's a lot going on in a girl's body at this age and stage in life. So programming the right dose of exercise is important at this stage in life. So we're going to talk about how it impacts fitness. Frequency. The minimum requirements are 60 minutes of moderate intense exercise per day. For a young girl, I'm going to sound like a broken record, but I think it's important to reiterate. Intensity. Well, moderate intense is what we want. We want them to be severely active. And in frequency, you also have to think about, well, if it's 60 minutes a day and my child is playing multiple sports, like it's, my child is going through swim practice and a soccer practice, let's think about a few days off in between so that my child has enough time to rest and recover. Kids love playing video games, watching movies, and, if they're playing a lot of sports, watching a few movies and playing just a few minutes of video games may be the right thing for them at this stage in life if they are physically active. The type, think about the different sports they're playing. Hopefully they're getting a lot of physical literacy at this age. So jumping, running, throwing, catching, kicking is really important at this stage. Time, 60 minutes a day, finding the right dosage for health and physical literacy. All right. So we talked about that. We're going to talk about now the eumenorrheic years. It's a mouthful to talk about some of these terms. This is when a girl begins to get her first menstrual cycle. We'll talk about the hormonal changes. All right. I hope you guys are coming up with a lot of questions and leaning in. All right. We're going to talk about the effects of stress on the body. Eumenorrhea versus secondary amenorrhea. Primary amenorrhea, sometimes people don't know there's two types, is when a girl doesn't get her first menstrual cycle, and that's for medical consultation. Secondary amenorrhea is the effects of too much stress on the body. I know as women, and even some men have probably said, women go like, oh my God. I mean, I've been guilty of it. I got my period. We moan and groan, but I think it's time to flip the switch and look at your menstrual cycle as something that's really healthy for your body. Because when you get into the second part, you'll understand like, oh my gosh, this is a wonderful thing. I am making hormones. Hormones are really good. Although they make us crazy sometimes, it is one of the best things a woman's body can do, right? So secondary amenorrhea is the absence of the menstrual cycle. It's the absence of hormones. It's due to a lot of stress on the body. Your body is really smart. If you're really stressed out in different shapes or form, it's going to take something away from you. And what it takes away from a woman is her menstrual cycle. Now we're going to think about what that does to a woman's body. I spoke about the importance of estrogen and testosterone because they're linked together, and progesterone. The types of stress could be mental, emotional, or physical. Physical can come in a way of overtraining. So if the right amounts of exercise and recovery aren't programmed, and there's a lot of overtraining that's going on, then amenorrhea may happen. The other thing that can cause amenorrhea is a nutritional and calorie deficit. So if a girl is exercising to extreme amounts and she's not getting the right amount of calories and or nutrients, then secondary amenorrhea might happen. It's a pretty serious condition because think about the effects of estrogen. Estrogen helps with collagen formation, helps with muscle contraction, repair, and recovery, along with testosterone, helps with the efficiency of blood vessels, and helps with bone formation. What's been found with young girls or women of all ages who suffer from secondary amenorrhea are severe immune responses. So colds, flus happen because estrogen is a high antioxidant, inflammation's higher. What you may find are a lot of muscle aches and pains. recovery is slower. Stress fractures may happen in the feet and leg and thigh bone because bone remodeling doesn't happen due to lack of estrogen. So it's important to balance out training and recovery and think about the importance of the menstrual cycle because it'll be important in future years to come. So with that being said, let's talk about the natural menstrual cycle. All right, we're going to talk about the 20s and 30s because I remember it. It's still an awesome time right now, but the 20s and 30s is awesome for women because they're either just discovering a lot of fitness, and so studies have shown women in their 20s and 30s are more active in conditioning type workouts. They're also more active in recreational intramural sports, and they're more active in recreationally competitive endurance events. I remember going, I've competed in a lot of recreational competitive events early on since college, and the 20s and 30s, the waves of women and men were humongous. And then you look at the waves of the 40s, and you're like, well, there aren't a lot of people. And then in the 50s, there aren't a lot of people either. Women peak, if you're an elite athlete, peak, and actually regular recreational endurance athletes, they peak in their 20s and late 20s in track and field events. Studies of elite marathon runners and elite triathletes in the Ironman Kona have found that 33 is about the average age of the fastest times in women. So it's a wonderful age to get physically active, and women train hard at this part of their life. But what I want to bring into this is it's awesome, but I want women to think about what it may be like if they couldn't do what they're doing in their 20s and 30s. How could they get there to keep doing what they're doing later on in life? And sometimes we don't think about that in terms of training. And, coaches may not think about that, whether you're male or female. It's important to think about the menstrual cycle because you want to think about, I like to look at it as saving something for retirement. How can you build capacity when you're in 20s and 30s so that you're able to do what you love to do when you're 40s, 50s? I've competed in triathlons. I've looked at, there's an 82-year-old woman, you're like, wow, and she's lapping me? How is she doing that? How is she able to build a capacity to be that 82-year-old triathlete? That is just amazing. So let's talk about the natural menstrual cycle. Let's talk about the hormonal changes that happen and how it can impact fitness throughout the different phases. So typically, I'm starting to talk fast. I gotta slow down because I'm getting really excited about this topic because it's really important. So typically, it's divided between two phases. The earlier phase, the follicular phase, and the luteal phase. Smack dab in the middle is ovulation. A typical cycle is about 28 days. For some women, 21 days. For some women, it's 35 days, and it can be up to 42 days. It all depends. Remember the concept of bi-individuality, genetics, and environmental factors. That comes into play in how your cycle goes. Now, I love to look at the natural menstrual cycle on a microcycle basis. So in programming, we have our mesocycles, right? We look at what the goal is. Within those goals, long-term goals, are those microcycles. Different things happen during the microcycles of the natural menstrual cycle. Some studies break it down into these little microcycles, which I love. So the follicular phase is broken down into early follicular phase and late follicular phase. The early follicular phase includes menstruation, so it's approximately days 1 to 7. The late follicular phase, days about 8 to 14, And because ovulation happens about days 13 through 16, it includes part of the late follicular phase. The luteal phase, it's one of those weird words, right? It's a tongue twister. How many times can you say it before messing up? The early luteal phase is about days 15 to 21. Remember, it includes part of ovulation, and we'll talk about ovulation too. The late luteal phase is about days 21 till about days 28. So I like to look at it week by week, because if you look at the graph there, as estrogen goes up and down, progesterone also goes up and down. Keep in mind, testosterone goes up and down with estrogen, even if it's not on this graph. If you look and divide it into 4 parts, the ratios of estrogen and progesterone change, and we'll talk about what those ratios mean. Back to the concept of bioindividuality. Every woman is different. Every woman experiences their menstrual cycle differently. Some women get cramps, some women get headaches, some women get migraines, some women get bloating. Within that same woman, every cycle is different from season to season. 1 month, I could get bloating. The next month, I'm not bloated at all. Some months, I feel like I'm coming down at a cold. Some months, I don't. And this time of COVID, it's kind of interesting when you feel like you're coming down with something like, oh my gosh, do I have COVID, right? It's an interesting time. Okay, let's talk about the early follicular phase, menstruation, what happens. So usually day 1 marks the first day of the menstrual cycle. Approximately days 1 to 7 is when bleeding occurs. For some women, they only bleed for 3 days. Some women bleed all 7 days. Bleeding is different for every woman. It goes anywhere from light, medium, and heavy. The heavier the bleeding, the more stress it is on the body. It's a normal time for biological stress. Blood volume is lost, particularly if a woman hasn't hydrated well during this time. With blood loss comes loss of iron, 1 to 6 milligrams per day. So if you think about blood and iron bring oxygen and nutrients to working muscles and tissues of the body. There's a higher natural level of inflammation. So we're going to talk about the effects on fitness. Estrogen, if you notice on the graph, was really low. Remember what I said, estrogen is a high antioxidant, so is testosterone. So there's a higher level of inflammation in a woman's body. Estrogen helps with muscle activation. Because estrogen levels are lower, muscle activation is going to be compromised, and recovery may be delayed or compromised. What I didn't talk about, the importance of testosterone and estrogen on brain function. We talk about that mind-muscle connection, right? There are neural mechanisms that help you contract your muscles. What happens is coordination may be a little bit clumsy. I'm going to use the word clumsy for lack of a better word during menstruation, because a woman isn't feeling well. When you're not feeling well, you're kind of like not in your own body. Energy levels are lower because there's loss of iron, loss of blood loss. How does that impact fitness? Now, I'm going to sound like a broken record like 4 times over. Recommendations by the World Health Organization. Frequency, 150 minutes to 300 minutes of moderate intense exercise, or 75 minutes of vigorous intense exercise, including 2 days a week of strengthening major muscle groups. Now, on that is your frequency. That's what you want to try to attain during that week. Maybe that week it's the time to go on to the lower range of 150 minutes compared to 300 minutes. Intensity, it's going to be relative. Let rate of perceived exertion be your guide. So the RPE scale, there's different kinds, but I like to use a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being the easiest, 10 being the hardest. Find what that relative intensity is during that week for that woman, knowing this is what's going on in her body. Type: cardiovascular exercise, muscular strength, balance and coordination, and agility. Those are components of fitness. What are you going to be able to fit in during that week? Maybe it's not a time for coordination and agility drills during menstruation. Maybe it's a time for a lot of cardiovascular activities and muscle strengthening. That's important 2 times a week. Some women like to do more. Maybe that's a time for, less intense, more body weight type exercises. So strength training doesn't have to mean weight training at this point. Time is going to depend on intensity. All right, let's go move on because we're running out of time. Late follicular phase, remember, includes part of ovulation. We're going to talk about ovulation too. Approximately days 8 to 14. Hormonal changes happen. Estrogen and testosterone increase at a really faster rate. A woman is starting to feel better. Progesterone is also going up, but at a slower rate. Remember what I said, what estrogen does and what testosterone does. High antioxidant, helps with muscle contraction and regeneration. Progesterone, it's good for the uterus, right? Think ovulation's coming, so progesterone's going to be important too. So, because estrogen is a high antioxidant, inflammation is going to start to get lower. A woman is not bleeding anymore. Muscle activation and contraction are improved, and recovery mechanisms are better. Coordination is improved. Bring on those agility drills, bring on those speed drills, bring on those plyometrics. It's all good. Energy levels are improved. Introduce those new workouts to your client if you need to, if you want to. Now, how much do you work out within that week? We talk about amenorrhea. Make sure you balance out training and recovery, even if there's a green light is on. Frequency, 150 minutes, I'm a broken record, to 300 minutes of moderately intense exercise, or 75 minutes of vigorous, intense exercise, and muscle strengthening at least 2 times a week of major muscle groups. Those are World Health Organization recommendations. This is a great time to try to meet those recommendations as far as frequency, also balancing out recovery. Intensity. If you want to use heart rate at this point, intensity levels are going to be relative. Since energy levels are up, you can program it to be on a scale of 1 to 10 RPE. Maybe you're in a higher range of that RPE scale, relatively. High intensity exercise could be awesome at this time. Type: muscular strength. There's different types of muscular strength. So think about what types of muscular strength you'd like to introduce around this time. Cardiovascular exercise. If you have a long endurance athlete, maybe this is a great time for those long endurance types of training. Type, I talked about, right? So I'm losing my train of thought. Those coordination drills are awesome for speed, agility, balance. Time, energy levels are up. You can go longer if you want to, if you need to. But think about the intensity of the exercise. So there's an inverse relationship where eventually too much intensity may not be a good thing. All right, we'll talk about intensity and ovulation. This is like green light time. Women in ovulation, for a reason, have high motivation. Testosterone is up. And guess what? High motivation, women want to have sex around this time because they're about to ovulate. Estrogen is high, testosterone is high, progesterone is also going high, but the ratios are much larger if you look at the graph. Happens about days 13 to 15. It's a favorable anabolic state. If a woman wants to train like a man at this time, go for it. One thing I want to keep in mind is that a lot of studies show The ovulation phase is when a lot of ACL injuries happen. You think about it, you're like, okay, if it's a highly anabolic state, estrogen and testosterone are up, and muscle recovery mechanisms are up, why are ACL injuries happening around this time? Think about that. What happens the week before? Menstruation. I like to say it's not the straw that broke the camel's back. It is a series of straws that broke the camel's back, that broke it maybe during ovulation. So you want to think about the capacity that was built during menstruation that may have caused the ACL injuries that have been found in all those studies. Something to think about, something to lean in and ask questions about. Let's talk about the effects on fitness. I'm sure you already know what they are, but I'll bring them up anyway. So, testosterone, estrogen up, inflammation is down, right? And inflammation is not always a bad thing, by the way. Muscle activation is high, right? Your muscle has receptors for estrogen. It can only accept estrogen and progesterone. Whereas too much of the other, it's going to take the one that has larger quantities. So guess what? Muscle activation is high. You're going to build more muscle. Women feel awesome and lean up around this time. Testosterone's high. So your recovery capabilities are high also. Coordination, because the brain is functioning well, right? You can introduce those new workouts and those high plyometric, types of exercises. Energy levels are high too. So go long if you need to, remembering the inverse relationship between intensity and time. Frequency. All right, broken record again. 150 minutes to 300 minutes of moderate intense exercise or 75 minutes of vigorous intense exercise. How are you going to program that? With training and recovery. And muscle strengthening at least 2 times a week of major muscle groups. How are you going to program that during that week with training and recovery? Intensity. Energy levels up. If that's the time to go intense, think about what you did the week before to go at that intense level. Type. Cardiovascular endurance. What type of muscular strength are you going to introduce? Balance, agility, coordination, those components of fitness. Think about what you want to introduce around ovulation time. It's a great time to introduce those types of exercises. Time, inverse relationship between intensity and time. So think about that. All right, let's go by the luteal phase, which includes part of ovulation. So in the beginning, that's awesome. Towards the end, days 15 to 21, maybe towards 21, it's the time for a woman to start listening to her body. Look at the ratio of progesterone. It goes up a little bit more steeply. Estrogen and testosterone start to decline a little bit more. So the ratios are different. Remember what I said progesterone does. Studies have shown there's a lot of amino acid degradation with progesterone. It's a relaxing muscle. It's got to keep the uterus intact. So if a woman has gotten pregnant, it's got to keep the uterus nice and soft for that egg to stay and implant. It also helps with build fat accumulation. So insulin resistance is higher around this time. So the normal biological conditions change. So inflammation levels may begin increasing around this time. Listen to your body. Muscle activation. Remember I talked about the estrogen, progesterone receptors? Since there's more progesterone, muscle activation may be delayed because there's less estrogen going on and there's less testosterone. Coordination may be a little blunted. I'm running out of time. I better go quick. All right. Energy levels start to decrease. Effects on fitness. What are the recommendations? I hope you can repeat it. 150 minutes to 300 minutes of moderate intense exercise or 75 minutes of vigorously intense exercise plus 2 days a week of muscle strengthening. How are you going to program that in frequency balancing out training and recovery. Intensity, let RPE be your guide. Type, cardiovascular endurance, what type of muscle strengthening are you going to do? Maybe no balance coordination around this time, agility coordination drills. Energy level, maybe it's shorter workouts as you get to closer to day 21. Little face, oh, I wish I had more time to talk about this. I'll give it a lot more time because we're ending here. We got about 10 minutes and I want to answer questions. This is the PMS phase. This is where women look at a commercial and they go, oh my God, you start crying, or you forget your water bottle and that just sets you off and you start crying for no reason. Well, there is a reason. Our hormones are changing. Look at the ratio of progesterone to estrogen. Those levels are higher. Estrogen decreases at a rapid rate. It's a stress biological condition. So if a woman suffers from PMS symptoms, this is when it happens: menstrual cramps, headaches. If a woman has autoimmune diseases like rheumatoid arthritis, irritable bowel syndrome, lupus, this is when they become escalated. Estrogen is down, helps with collagen formation. Your skin looks like crap sometimes. Inflammation levels are high. Muscle activation is lower, a lot more progesterone. Remember those muscle activators? Coordination might be blunted. Maybe it's like, no agility drills at this time. Energy levels start to plummet because of the higher progesterone levels. It becomes a little bit more stressful for the body getting ready for menstruation. So frequency. I talked about the recommendations by the World Health Organization. 150 minutes to 300 minutes of moderately intense exercise. Maybe it's not the time to do the 75 minutes of vigorous intense exercise. Type, muscular strength, cardiovascular endurance, balance, agility, coordination. Pick wisely here. And time, energy levels plummet. You may have to decrease. Now, I'm going to move on here because I've got these references and we're running out of time. I hope you'll lean in and ask questions. We've got about 8 minutes. I have a lot of references listed here. I use these throughout the years. A lot of them are current. They're all peer-reviewed studies and books. I use them in my PhD studies, and I hope you'll lean and ask questions on a very important topic of women's health. So Jackie's going to come back on camera, and hopefully we'll get time to answer questions, yeah? Okay.
Yes, absolutely. We do have just a little bit of time for questions. Jiji, thank you so much. That was a lot of great information, and I know it spurs on a lot of questions, right, for people that are watching. And I know watching the live feed here, we do have a lot of women that are watching, obviously, but also a lot of men who are training with female clients, and hopefully they're taking this information and putting together their thoughts as well as how they might be talking to their female clients. So once again, thank you all for joining us. You can type in your question right now into the live chat bar on your YouTube viewer. And in the meantime, on your screen right now, you can see Jiji's contact information. So feel free to connect with her, continue the conversation. If we don't quite get your question answered today, you can reach out there. And also, we will be having a live Facebook chat. So after today's presentation, you can go to the ACE Fitness Facebook page. The chat is live right now, so you can type in your question there, and Jiji will be responding over the next few days to continue this conversation on such a great topic. So feel free to type your questions in to the chat bar, and we'll take a few live ones here in just a moment. Again, if you liked this information and want to learn more, we do have some other courses related to training women from the ACE library. You can go on the CEC Club or on the acefitness.org website under Continuing Education and find a few more courses on this topic. And remember, your CEC Club is a great way to get all the continuing education that you need in order to renew your certification. Once again, 20 hours, that's 2.0 CECs are required every 2 years in order for you to recertify as an ACE professional. So we'll take a little bit of time here for some live questions. Once again, we had a lot of great discussion coming in on our live
great.
chat. So want to get
exciting.
to a few of those, and just want to start with kind of a broad question. And I think this speaks to a lot of women who are training other women, but also women who are training themselves, right? And are interested and passionate about exercise. Because we are all different, this question comes from Caitlin. Thank you very much for your question. Because women are all so different, we talked about that bio-individuality. And you're talking about the early follicular phases, right? You mentioned those in today's presentation. Should we still be thinking about modifying volume and intensity in those earlier phases if I'm a woman who doesn't have a lot of symptoms, or doesn't go through a lot of fluctuation as far as outwardly what's happening in my cycle? So let's talk about that a little bit.
So it depends also, I mentioned environmental factors. So maybe your nutrition is up to par and you are not going through a lot of the inflammation markers. So if nutrition has a lot to do with the way you go through your cycles. That is a great way to mitigate a lot of the inflammation levels and what's going on for recovery-wise. So if you understand what's going on muscularly, with the estrogen receptors and progesterone receptors, it's a great time to introduce different forms of recovery. So I think I would still pay attention to it because it's really important. Listen to your body. And think about what you're doing for recovery strategies, not just muscularly, right? There's different types of recovery. Sleep and nutrition are huge for recovery. So think about what you're doing there. So that's awesome. You don't feel that, lucky you.
Right. Yeah, as we're all different, right?
Yeah.
So another question that's coming through, I'm going to kind of wrap up a few questions that are on this theme, is around, we're talking a lot about the hormone fluctuations, right, that happen in a normal circumstance. Obviously, you talked about some hormones that we may have from medicines, from topical creams, pills, those kinds of things. That's a little outside of maybe what we're talking about here today.
For sure.
So we're just talking about our normal fluctuations. What considerations do we need to make for women in using exercise to help us mitigate some of those bigger symptoms that we might have when going through those big fluctuations, the pain and the bloating and the discomfort and some of that? Let's talk about some of the ways that exercise can really help with those things, make us feel better.
Okay, so it depends on the type of exercise. Obviously, if you're not feeling well, you're not going to want to go intense. There are lots of good exercises that promote lower levels of inflammation. For example, cardiovascular exercise. There's a lot of studies that show, I talk about moderate intensity, but low intensity exercise has been shown to improve your immune status and inflammation levels. So there are certain inflammation markers that happen with certain types of light intensity and moderate intensity exercise. So let intensity be your guide. Those HIIT workouts, although they promote levels of inflammation is a good thing, but there are lots of other cardiovascular exercises. Look at the type of exercises that promote better inflammation markers. And moving your body really feels good around this time. Although it's the last thing you want to do, just a light walk is, it's amazing how much better you feel after just a 10-minute walk. So, yeah.
Great. So another question, we'll just take one more here and then we'll wrap things up.
Okay.
Around, this is a big, broad concept, right? How can we as health and fitness professionals, in talking with clients who are in these earlier stages in life, not maybe they're prepubescent, we've got maybe teen girls that we're working with, or working with a team, things like that. How can we help them understand that this is something, as you said, that's a healthy thing for them to be going through, and that these are good things that are happening sometimes, even though they might not feel that good?
I think the approach to the menstrual cycle really has to do with the way a woman feels about the menstrual cycle. A lot of times it's like, oh my God, she's on her period, don't talk to her about this. I think the approach from a coaching standpoint is important. Let them know, be scientific about it. Let them know it's a natural thing. It's a good thing for these reasons. And if you talk about the hormones and the reasons of the importance of estrogen and testosterone, they'll start to understand like it's okay to go through these. It's a natural process of your body telling you to slow down. There is the body is really smart. It goes up and down for a reason, right? We can't go hard and go fast the whole time, even if we want to. Your body will tell you to slow down, and there is a good reason for it.
Mm-hmm. Great. So listening to our clients is an important piece of all of this, understanding how what their relationship is with their own body and talking through those important parts. Right?
For sure.
Great. Thank you, Jiji, very much. Thank you for all of your live questions. Once again, you are watching today for free, and this is part 1 of a 2-part series around training women through different life stages. So if you would like to earn continuing education credits for this presentation, along with receiving part 2, which talks about the latter stages of the women's stages in health, which Jiji has mentioned throughout today's presentation, you can go to the website acefitness.org/pastwebinars and purchase the 2-hour course, which will contain that part 2. Once you pass the quiz associated with that 2-hour course, you'll receive 2 hours, that's 0.2 CECs, within your My ACE account. And once again, be on the lookout for a follow-up email from ACE detailing how you can make that purchase if you are interested. And you can join us again next month. We will be continuing this conversation around training women, where we will have our expert Farrell Haruska in, and we'll be talking about weightlifting for women as well. So we're looking forward to that. Please make sure you sign up on the ACE Fitness page for next month's live webinar. And remember to connect with ACE in a variety of ways. Let us know what you thought about this topic. You can join the ACE Fitness Facebook page and go onto the live chat that is there now if you would like to continue the conversation with our expert, Jiji Pollock, about training women through different life phases. Once again, Jiji, thank you so much for joining us today. It was great to have you here.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Thank you all for watching. Now, let's get people moving.